Hi, my name is Kevin McDonald, and I'm declaring my independence. Independence from what? Why, negative thoughts and energy, of course. Chief among them, hate, division, and fear. You see, I know that we're all one, and together we can solve any problem, save our planet and each other. Please, join me as we come together as one and choose a better way to be. So now, let's begin with my independence report. And welcome, everybody, to my Independence Report. My name is Kevin McDonald, and we've got a heck of a show for you today. And it's the day after Thanksgiving, and which would make it Black Friday, I believe. It's never Black Friday for me because I don't go. I don't go shopping whenever I can and stuff. So, but it's a beautiful day today, and we're gonna have a great discussion in this hour. I've been looking forward to this from some time because those of you who know and have listened to some of the shows that I've done, I'm really interested in the American West and the history of the Indians and the Indian Wars and all of that. And we have somebody that's going to be able to talk to us about that and a whole bunch of other stuff because he's written 11 books, and his name is Jeff Rasley. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks, Kevin. Great to be with you.
You know, it's awesome. I've been reading through the list of your books. There's some really intriguing titles. You've done a lot of things in your young life.
Well, my not so young life. I decided a long time ago, life, you should try to approach it like an artist and make a beautiful work of art out of your life if you can. And I can't say mine has been completely beautiful, but I've tried to do some worthy things in it and with the tools that I have.
Well, you gotta just keep going, and you keep walking, and you keep doing the best you can. That's kind of the human condition, isn't it? That we don't always, even though we have the best of intentions, sometimes it just doesn't work out quite the way we'd hoped.
Not every time.
But I figure it's kind of like a baseball player, an all-star baseball player bats 300, and they think that's just ducky, and he said that's only getting a hit 3 out of 10 times, so he fails a lot more than he wins. But I suppose when he gets a home run, then he gets to win, and that's kind of how I feel about our life. If we keep working at it, we're going to win enough that it's going to be fun.
I think that's an excellent attitude.
But so when did you start writing? Because you've got, like I said, 11 books. You've got over 80 publications of your work in different magazines and things. I mean, you've been writing a little while, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a kind of a literary family. My grandfather was the editor of our local newspaper. My mom was the city editor. My stepfather followed in grandfather's shoes, became the city editor or became the editor in chief. And my wife published her first or had her first book published at the age of 21. Wow. And she's an English professor. And I started writing bad poetry when I was a teenager and, progressed, I hope, by the time I was in law school to writing some more worthy articles, and had my first law review article published when I was in law school. And I've been writing about all sorts of different things ever since.
Boy, you have got a really knowledgeable family in your household. Your wife is an English teacher. You're a lawyer. You guys must have some very interesting discussions over dinner.
Yeah, especially with our cat, who seems to think she's the most intelligent member of the family.
Of course. A friend of mine says that, dogs have masters, cats have staff. So you just fulfill her needs.
Yes, she's definitely in charge, and we're her servants.
and she wouldn't have it any other way. So let's talk about your writing and some of the books that you've done. Of the 11, which would you call your favorite one?
Um, Whichever is the last one. Um, I'm actually working on another one now, but for purposes of this discussion, of course, my favorite one is my last one, the one that inspired our connection, America's Existential Crisis, which is about relations between Native Americans and white folks, or Americans, non-Native Americans, and sort of a historical and a familial perspective on those relations, and where they've gone wrong, where they've gone right, and what we could do to much improve them for the future.
It's interesting. Way back when, in 1970 or so, I was going to a movie with a friend of mine, and I don't know if you remember this title or not, but the movie was called Billy Jack, and it was about an Indian who was he lived on a reservation, and the very few lived on the reservation anymore. But he was dedicated to trying to help the people understand the plight of the American Indian, what we did to them, um, how many treaties there were, how many treaties are still in force, and how many we broke. And was trying to get the word out. That was the first time that I became socially aware that we because at that time the history books did not talk about those things and what we did to the indigenous people of this continent, and how badly they were served by us and stuff. So I'm really am interested to talk to you about this book, because I agree with you. I think that there is a crisis that is going on with how we've treated these folks over so many years.
Yeah, well, and I saw Billy Jack too when it came out, and really enjoyed it, and have to say that I sort of sympathized with Billy Jack, who started out being a peacemaker and ends up kicking the crap out of some white racist guys. Um, but which I think is the feeling that a lot of Native Americans have today and have had for a long time, because of broken treaties. Yeah, I mean, there were Indian wars, numerous Indian wars between the United States of America and different Indian tribes and nations, which the U.S. Won almost all except one of them, um, which was against Red Cloud, back right after the Civil War, which ended up with the what was called the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, which is one of the key legal points that my book is concerned with, um, because that treaty recognized, after really a fight to a standstill between Red Cloud and the U.S. Army, that the people in that area, who were primarily Sioux in the Sioux Nation, would have the Black Hills as their homeland, and this really at that point was not considered a reservation. Um, it was recognized as their homeland because this was a treaty between equal nations. Um, Unfortunately, the treaty, after gold was discovered in, I think it was 1874, uh, in the Black Hills, that then all these white prospectors, rushed in to try to find gold, and then General Custer came in and, in effect, intentionally instigated a battle, with the Sioux, which he stupidly lost because of not believing his scouts, and being kind of an egomaniac, and was slaughtered along with 270 of his cavalrymen. But because of that defeat, it really inspired the United States to then go to war with the Sioux. General Custer was turned into this national hero through a great PR machine. And then the Sioux, the U.S. declared that they had broken the treaty by attacking General Custer, which of course was completely backwards, and forced them out, took the Black Hills away, and said, your reservation will now be the Badlands, and split the Sioux up into different reservations within the Badlands, which are the most inhospitable area in the entire lower 48. And which then eventually in 1890 led to the massacre at Wounded Knee, when Sioux people started trying to leave the reservations that they were forced into because they were basically starving to death.
It was a horrible, horrible piece of history that a lot of us didn't know. I remember a book that I picked up about the life of George Armstrong Custer, how he was a general at 24 and all of that. But it painted the Indians as less than a great group of people, and it painted them as being the enemy, the negative, the bad stuff, which in fact, when Custer attacked them, he attacked a village that had men, women, and children in it, and were on the banks of the Little Bighorn because that's where they could get enough feed for their animals and stuff, and they were just trying to live peacefully at that moment.
Yeah.
Isn't that your understanding?
Well, yeah. I mean, he really had the intention of trying to uh, draw the Sioux into a war so that it would be the pretext for moving them out, and letting the prospectors come in. And because of the 1830 Removal Act, the United States president had legal authority granted to him by Congress through this Congressional Act of 1830 to any tribe that was declared hostile to the interests of the United States could be forcibly removed west of the Mississippi. And so, using the 1830 Removal Act after Little Bighorn, that's why the Sioux Nation was, their lands, the Black Hills, were stolen from them by a treaty violation, and they were moved into the Badlands.
Didn't President Grant, who Ulysses S. Grant at the time, wasn't that his intention the entire time?
Well, actually, historians give Grant some credit of trying to resist. There were the railroads' interest and the mining interests had been petitioning Grant for some time to remove the Sioux from the Black Hills. And after gold was discovered, it became, just a huge drumbeat, and he resisted it. And so it wasn't until Custer went in, and without Grant's approval, Grant did not give approval to Custer to enter into the Black Hills and enter into the homeland of the Sioux. Custer did that without any authority beyond what he gave to himself. But then after that, the public pressure on Grant was so great that, yeah, he gave in to it.
And it changed. The Sioux were a proud people, and when they left after the Little Bighorn and had to go north, um, and then they ended up at Wounded Knee and stuff. That it's a beautiful story to tell in a really sad way, because they were a proud people at one time.
Yeah, it is. And why that story was so important to me personally is I have an ancestor, Lieutenant James DeFries Mann, who was commander of a company at uh, Wounded Knee. And he was front and center uh, in the massacre. And in fact, his interviews to two different newspaper reporters and a long letter that he dictated for his brother are some of the best historical records we have of what happened at Wounded Knee. Now, his version is somewhat slanted to make the 7th Cavalry look, certainly better than it looked in the eyes of the Sioux. Um, but he gives, from his point of view, a very straightforward, factual account of what happened, how the in what he would call the battle was sparked, and because the Sioux didn't keep written records. I mean, their culture was not one which created written records. Historians really for a long time only had the version of the 7th Cavalry. But even given that, there were people who recognized that this was a massacre, that it really was a setup from the beginning. And General Nelson Miles, who was the supreme commander of over the Northwest Territory, a year after Wounded Knee in 1891, wrote a report where he had investigated why did this happen, and and his conclusion was it was a complete failure of the reservation system, that the reservation system, locked up these people who were nomadic people. It was destroying their culture, and it put them in land that was just not sustainable. And then beyond that, some of the Bureau of Indian Agency managers and contractors were engaged in corrupt practices, money and resources that were supposed to be going to the reservations were getting siphoned off. And it was just, the system was basically a prison system for these defeated tribes who had this really beautiful nomadic life where they, roamed over the land that they considered their land and hunted buffalo until white people exterminated the buffalo and then imprisoned them in these reservations on land that wasn't part of their homeland.
As white people, we sure did a good job there, didn't we?
Well, white people have been very good at conquering other people. It does seem to be a talent that we have, but we also have the talent of creating ideals of justice and fairness and putting those into constitutions and laws, which, when actually practiced, I think have been the high point of legal civilization.
No, I agree. If we could figure out that we really need to follow the Constitution and not, redefine it all the time, depending upon who's in power at the time, it would be nice, because it's a beautiful document, and it's the ideals are very high. As a matter of fact, the Constitution didn't even live up to the ideals that it was saying it wanted to live up to at the time that it was done.
Yeah, when it defines black people as 2/3 of a human being within the Constitution that starts out about the freedom and equality of all people, and I mean, mixing the Declaration of Independence in with the Constitution, but since they were written by the same people, Why
Yep.
not? But yeah, I mean, it goes back to the old saying of practice what you preach. And our culture, our Anglo-American history, I think, has been very good at preaching some wonderful ideals. The practicing, mm, you know, not as good as the preaching.
Not so much, not so much. So tell me, you write about the existential crisis. Um, where are we today with the Native American populations, and what do you think we need to be doing about that?
Well, the book ends on a very hopeful note because we're actually, I think, at a high water mark in terms of very historical, very low water, low tide, because when the Biden administration came in, one of the first acts that they passed was, which is part of that great big $1 trillion American Rescue Act. Part of that act is called the American Indian Rescue Act, and it allocates almost $32 billion to very all sorts of different projects to uplift Native communities and to provide educational, economic, infrastructural development, and to help with historical preservation of Native tribes and communities. And this is the biggest amount of money that's ever been allocated for the purpose of trying to, I mean, I guess you could say, to undo some of the injustices committed by the US government against Native nations. And so, and the other thing that, gives me real hope is the Secretary of the Department of Interior, for the very first time, is a Native American, Deb Haaland, who's a Pueblo Navajo um, member of that tribe and nation. Uh, so the Department of Interior is in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, is in charge of all relations between the United States and Native nations. And so she's going to be in charge of making sure that the money is spent the way it should be. And I think, you know, there's just because of her own motivation, I think there will be better use of funds than historically has happened when, we've had good intentions and the results haven't been that great. I mean, just recently there's been this real focus on how the Native American boarding schools, which started out as, this kind of high-minded intention of helping Native American kids to integrate into white society. Okay, so, that sounds good if that's what they want to do, but a lot of these kids were forcibly taken from their parents, not because they wanted to go to those schools, they were forced to go to those schools. And then the what the schools did is they basically stripped the kids of their indigenous culture and tried to turn them into good Christians and turn them out with low skilled job experience, as opposed to preparing them for higher education. I mean, there were trade schools, which, you know uh, could be good, but that if that's the ceiling of the opportunity offered, not so good. But just, recently there's been, kind of a media discovery of this. PBS just had a special on it. Um, and, there is, I think there is a real awakening to the plight of Native American communities and a commitment within the public media and within the US government to try to do something about it. Now, what is the level of consciousness of most Americans? I don't know, but that's what I wanted to do with this book, is to at least the people that read the book will understand how unjustly the United States of America has treated Native tribes and what is owed, both legally and morally, to Indigenous people. And then I, give the last section of the book is to offer sort of a road forward on how Native communities can be developed without, bankrupting the rest of us.
Jeff, how many uh, reservations are there in this country? I don't even know. Or are when you're talking about Indian communities, are we talking about on reservation land or just anywhere that there's and how many reservations are there?
Yeah, I can't tell you the exact number of reservations, but it's hundreds. Um,
Really, I
you
had no
know,
idea.
yeah, there's a lot of small reservations, and they're mostly in the west of the Mississippi, but there's a fair number in the Midwest, in the North, even in the East. Um, and that's I'm mainly talking when I talk about development of Native communities. I'm mainly talking about communities on reservations. And
Right.
now, about half of Native Americans live off of reservations. But uh, if you're Native American and you've chosen to leave the reservation, then you've made a choice to try to integrate into the majority culture, and that's fine. If that's your choice, more power to you. I mean, that's freedom. We're one of our fundamental principles as Americans is that sort of freedom to choose. Um, but the native communities that are on the reservations are the poorest communities in every objective measurement. They have the lowest life expectancy of any racial ethnic group. They have the highest rate of poverty. They have the highest rate of unemployment. Um, the lowest rate of health measurements. I mean, you take any sort of objective standard of living, and Native Americans in reservation communities are at the bottom, every single measurement.
Is part of that because the reservation land that they're on is not the best piece of property in the world? I know that there are some in the Southwest that don't even have any water on them. That they have to bring the water in and stuff. So um and and had a question I want to ask you. You're familiar with the internment of the Japanese in World War II?
Yeah.
In
Hmm.
the 80s, they were all given, the ones that were still with us, were given a check for $20,000 as reparation for that. Don't you
Hmm.
think at least I kind of tend to think that we owe it to these people to help them and in some form or manner of reparations for what was done before, to at least give them a good living standard and educational system that'll work. Is that kind of your view?
Uh, I actually go through the debate in one chapter about reparations. Uh, Reparations, it's kind of a nice sounding, easy solution, but actually working it out would there's a lot of problems. Like, first of all, who's a Native American? Uh,
Exactly.
there's about 5.5 million people that have at least some significant Native American heritage, genetic heritage. there's only about 2.5 million who are what we call full-blooded Native Americans. So if we decide, it's $10,000 a person. So if you're a quarter Native American, you get 2,500. I mean, how would you do that? And then what about, would it only be for Native Americans who are still on reservations, or would it be for all Native Americans? And what's the appropriate amount? So I actually argue against reparations, and what the proposal that I think makes the most sense and is the most workable is to infuse Native American communities with developmental dollars and know-how. And so it's, like right now, the country is going through this big debate about infrastructure development for the country. Well, what I think Native American communities need is to have infrastructure development to the point where their communities are brought up to the standard of most American cities and towns. Which, when you talk about, some of these communities, they don't have water. You're right. I mean, a lot of these communities don't have any of the basic infrastructure. And now, if a particular Native American family or a whole community doesn't want that, fine. If they would want to try to maintain a traditional lifestyle where they're living a nomadic sort of existence, living off the land, and that's their choice, fine. But the vast majority of Native Americans on reservations are living in poverty-stricken ghettos. Um, and it's just, people would be shocked if they aren't familiar with it, if they visit some of these communities. I mean, Wounded Knee, anybody that would go to Wounded Knee would just be amazed. I mean, there's almost no employment there. There's almost no working infrastructure there. And the whole, Pine Ridge Reservation, where Wounded Knee is like, you get to the line of where that reservation starts, the road isn't paved. You go right up to the reservation, the road is paved. And that's how the difference in treatment has been.
Now the reservations themselves, and help me here because I'm not sure if I've got this right or not. That they are considered to be sovereign nations, and that the land is not United States land, but it is their land. Is that right?
It's in a twilight zone. It's really, yeah, it's a legal twilight zone, because on the one hand, they're the tribe or nation that who has this reservation has certain legal authority within that land, but the federal government has oversight authority. And so, for example, federal courts have authority over native courts, and a person charged with a crime within reservation land, or even now, because of a recent U.S. Supreme Court case, land that was supposed to be reservation land, but that got stolen, that the reservation was not actually set up, has the right to take their a criminal case to federal court as opposed to state court, or as opposed to tribal court.
So it sounds like a very complicated, convoluted system that isn't working for anybody.
Yeah, it is a convoluted system. The people that are living within it, they know it, they understand it. I mean, that's what they've lived with. It looks weird from the outside because it's not like any state any town, any city within the wider United States. I mean, there's one legal system. I mean, you've got your local courts and your state level courts and your federal courts, and we all know how that works. But there's this whole other, this tribal governance, which for most sort of daily functions that people living on the res are, in their daily sort of normative life, it's tribal governance that they would be most concerned about. But then there are all these other issues which the federal courts and the US Congress supersede.
Now, with the treaties that, well, first of all, I don't know how many treaties are actually still in force or that haven't been broken, because we tended to sign a treaty, and then it was when it became no longer in our best interest to continue that treaty, we would trash it, and then we would sign it. And so, how many treaties are there that are still in force? And probably none, I would guess. How many? Do you have any idea?
Well, it's really an interesting question that a recent Supreme Court case, I mean, it just came out a year or two ago. I think that I describe it in my book, and the name of the case, I think, is Carpenter versus Murphy. And what happened in this case is, I believe he was Cherokee, um, was charged with a crime in eastern Oklahoma, not on a reservation, just in eastern Oklahoma, prosecuted in state court. He appealed, went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, the U.S. made a treaty with the Cherokee to give them a reservation in eastern Oklahoma. Treaty was broken. There was never, the reservation that was promised was never set up, at least according to the bounds that the original treaty had stated. So this guy, even though he was not within the reservation, was charged by Oklahoma police, prosecuted in Oklahoma State Court. Court said no, he has a right to take his case to federal court. His conviction is thrown out. So the implication of that is that the U.S. Supreme Court is saying all these treaties that were broken or were not fulfilled have legal effect. Now, of course, some native people are going to say, okay, so we get the eastern half of Oklahoma. That's what we were supposed to get. That's not going to happen. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1980, in a case brought by the Sioux Nation, ruled that the Black Hills had been illegally taken, that the court recognized the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty was violated by the U.S. government. So what did the court do? It said, we're not giving you back the Black Hills. Sorry, ain't going to happen. We're going to give you money. And they awarded, millions of dollars back then. It's now worth $1.5 billion. That pot of money is sitting there unclaimed because the Sioux Nation refuses to give up on its claim to the land. I personally think that's a mistake. On the one hand, I completely understand it. On a heart level, I totally understand it. And if I was Sioux, maybe I would take that same position. But from a head level, there's a whole bunch of money right there that you could use to help uplift your communities in so many ways. And it's just not conceivable, to me at least, that the US government is ever going to give the Black Hills back, just like, the Cherokee are not going to get Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, you talk about a revolution by white people. That's, it's just not going to happen. I mean, you could, from a strict legal standpoint, you'd think, well, it should. I mean, that's what the agreement was. If it was broken, and we're finding, just based on basic contract law, a contract is breached, if you can force the side that breached the contract to fulfill it, that's called specific performance, then a courts can do that. On the other hand, traditional legal principle is if you cannot enforce specific performance, what do? You get money damages. And that's what the court has said. It's just not practical to try to give you the land back now, 180, 100 years later, but we will give you money.
So there's $1 billion sitting in a bank somewhere that the Sioux could use to upgrade their schools, to build roads, to put their people to work. Because I also understand that one of the Native Americans are one of the groups that has got a lot of drug addiction and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff because they have no hope. These people need hope, and that money would go a long way. So I agree with you. It would be nice. It would be advantageous for them because you're right. They're never. It's just like they're never going to get a sizable chunk of this country back so that they could go to a nomadic lifestyle again. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I mean, if you think about it, the year before Columbus came, Native Americans controlled 100% of the land. Now, reservations, they control something like 2%. So they've lost 98% of it.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you start to say what you should get back? So, it isn't going to happen. And development is the way to go. I mean, it's education. You improve the schools. You improve basic infrastructure. You do economic development to help businesses get off the ground. And I cite a number of examples in the book about how this is done, how it's worked in particular cases. I started a foundation over in Nepal, which is called the Basa Village Foundation, and it's working with people who are very similar to our Native Americans. I mean, this village, when I first went there in 2008, there's no running water, no electricity, a school that went up to third grade, no radio, no TV. I mean, nothing of what we think of as infrastructure. It was subsistence farming. Now they have running water, they have electricity, they have cellular telephone, they have computers in the school. In a very short time, working with the local community and with people who were trekkers and climbers who've been to the Nepal Himalayas, we in partnership with the community, have developed this community. There's a medical clinic. I mean, it now has all of the basic infrastructure. And so the one delicate issue in doing that kind of development is still respecting the local culture, letting the local people decide, to what extent do they want development, and for the local people to decide the direction of the development, and for the local people to be ultimately in control of it and not be owned, run by outsiders, but have the community in charge of it. And so that's what we've done over in Nepal. It could be done here. It just takes money and the willingness and the insightfulness for how to do it right.
Exactly. In Washington State, the one thing that they're using now, it's not all the tribes, but some of the tribes are into casinos because it's federal land. The state has nothing to do with it, so they can set up things differently and play different games. And that's kind of the running joke is that we put them on reservations, and now they're taking all our money. because we're going to the casinos. But is that an idea that is workable in any way, shape, or form? I understand if you're in the desert in Southwest Arizona and there's no running water, there's no way you could put up a casino there. But in some cases, does that help? But you know what it doesn't do is it doesn't seem to help all of them because the housing is still not being updated. You know what I mean? They could do better at helping themselves or helping their fellow Indians, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely one piece of it. Economic development in terms of an actual business enterprise that can be successful. And casinos have been very successful for some tribes. Um, but it won't be successful for all tribes on all reservations. I mean, there are some uh, some reservations where there aren't any tourists. I mean, the only people that are going to gamble there are the local Indians who already have, problems with drug and alcohol addiction, and so now you're going to add gambling addiction to that. Not a great solution.
No.
Um, but yeah, there's a number of tribes that have done very well with casinos and have made a lot of money and have distributed that money wisely and fairly. Others, it's just one more way that, a small group of people have made money off sort of, you know, the brand of it's an Indian casino, without really having that money spread throughout and benefit the whole community.
I am familiar with the Muckleshoot tribe. They've got a huge operation there for a casino, and they've done very well. But what I think where the mistake that they've made is that they give everybody that is a actual Muckleshoot member and can prove it a stipend on a monthly basis, and which doesn't help those people get up, go to work, do the things that they should do, go to school. That's that sort of thing that they've got the money. They could, I think, use it a little bit better. Maybe I don't know.
Well, it's a I find it really interesting to compare Native American communities that I have some familiarity with the communities in Nepal that I have developed a fairly deep familiarity with, because of my foundation work over there. And one of the fundamental differences, because on the surface they look very similar in so many ways, and even their sort of their religious practices and their philosophies are very similar, but a big difference is the the ethnic tribal groups in Nepal were never defeated by a a colonial army, an invading army, and the Native Americans are a defeated people, and the level of depression, um, and just mental, mental illness, is rampant. Just like the addiction problem is rampant, and it isn't in the tribal ethnic groups in Nepal. They're very proud, happy people. I mean, when people go with me and go trekking with me and visit Bassa Village, every single person that does that says that these are the happiest people I've ever known. And they are. There's just this wonderful, delightful, happy attitude they have, even though by our standards, they're dirt poor farmers. Um, Whereas in Native Americans, and I describe in the book about my own experience of visiting Wounded Knee and how the people were just not happy. I mean, just this feeling of depressed. Not everybody by any means. I mean, I talk about some kids that I ran into who were just delightful kids on Pine Ridge Reservation, but um, there's something about when you're a defeated people, it's hard to pick yourself back up. And that sense of defeat goes from one generation to another, unless there's some sense of victory, some sense of, okay, we lost this war, but now we're picking ourselves up. We're getting economically developed. Our kids are going to school. Life is good. And it just, for so many Native communities, life hasn't been good.
No, and I know that you spent a lot of time in your book talking about a potential solution. I'm not going to go into that here because I want people to buy your book, and and that would be good. By the way, we've been talking with Jeff Rasley. Rasley.
Rasley.
Rasley, I was right the first time. Okay.
You were, and then you backtracked.
Then I screwed up. Right. That's Jeff Rasley, and he's written 11 books, and they're all socially relevant. He has traveled the world, climbed mountains. He's trekked all over the place. I don't know when you have had time to write 11 books, because your life is very full. Are you still out and about doing all these things, or are you calming down in your midlife?
Yeah, I think I may be past midlife and into old age now. But yeah, the pandemic kind of squelched going back to Nepal anytime soon. And unfortunately, in Nepal, the virus is still rampant, and it's one of the countries that we're advised not to go. A group of trekkers, which I helped to organize, did recently go there and had a wonderful time, but they were mostly from South Africa. Well, in fact, they were all from South Africa, led by an expat college mate of mine. But so none of our American groups have been able to go back yet. We have the Basa Foundation. One of our directors, she's organized a trek that was going to go last year, got canceled. It was going to go this fall, canceled. So we're hoping she can take her group over in the spring. But yeah, so I've done some traveling during the pandemic. In fact, I wrote an article about taking a road trip, a cross-country road trip, when the pandemic first broke out, because we started off from Indianapolis to drive to LA and hit a bunch of national parks on the way, thinking when we first started in March of the pandemic year that, oh, it's just going to be restricted to Seattle and Washington State. And by the time we got to Moab, Utah, it had spread all the way across the country and the shutdown started. So that was an interesting time to be on the road.
Oh, I can imagine. That would be tough. That would be very tough. That'd be very tough. So, can you give us a peek under the blanket of what the next book's going to be about?
Well, the next book is a different book, very much different from the last one, which addressed a very serious issue that I think is important. This book, the working title is A Pickleball Soap Opera: Love, Murder, and Pickleball. I've been playing a lot of pickleball during the pandemic lockdown. That's been my great escape. And so, as Mark Twain said, write what you know. And so I've gotten to know pickleball. So I've created a murder romance mystery based on a group of pickleball players.
Sounds like a fun time. Well, when you finish that one, you'll have to come back. But we've been talking about your book, which is let's see. Let's see. It is America's Existential Crisis. It involves the Native American population and how we got into this mess, and how Jeff is going to help us get out of this mess. There it is. That's it right there. When did it come out, by the way?
It came out in May.
How's it doing so far?
Well, I think it should sell more than it has.
I think every author I've ever met has said the exact same thing.
Is J.K. Rowling even satisfied with her sales? No,
Exactly.
there can be one more reader.
Absolutely, that's great. Well, I wish you much success, sir. And I really it is a topic that is under discussed, under reported on, and is kind of our dirty little secret that there are places in our country that are so fun. And I keep reminding myself, this is the United States of America, and we've got places that are dirt poor, that are not being well taken care of, and we shouldn't allow that. That shouldn't be allowed in this country. Maybe we'll buy a few less missiles. That'd be good.
Yeah, that would be good.
You
Well,
know,
Kevin, thanks a lot for having me. It's been really delightful talking to you.
I enjoyed every minute of it, and thank you for doing what you're doing. It's important work, and I just appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to tell our audience before we go?
Well, I guess, just sticking with the theme of our talk, is I hope Americans, all Americans, including Native Americans, will just become more familiar with the real history and not just the Hollywood version of history of the injustices that have been visited on Native tribes, and not just be depressed about it, feel bad about it, or feel guilty about it, but let's, look at it, what it is, and let's do something about it. And, there are solutions where these communities can be uplifted. I've been a part of doing that, and I know it can be done.
And it should be done. We
And it
we
should be done.
we have a responsibility. Okay, we don't. We weren't here, but our ancestors and the people that came before us were here, and so we need to clean up after them, and we should. That's the right thing to do. So I hope that they'll take your advice, and we do that.
Well, I do too. And, it's some people want to sort of wallow in guilt. That doesn't do any good.
No,
I don't feel guilty about the fact that my actual ancestor was a participant in the Wounded Knee massacre. I mean, I didn't do it. I wasn't there, but I recognize that a terrible wrong was done, and because I recognize that, I'd like to help be part of the solution to, correct that injustice.
well said, sir. Jeff Rasley has been our guest. I got it right. So thank you. Go to Amazon. He's got 11 books there. There's some great titles. Next time you're here, we'll run them down and we'll talk a little bit about each one of them, because it would be fun. It'd be fun because you are very well read, and you're a very good writer. So it would be fun to talk to you again.
I'd love to come back, Kevin. I'll look forward to it.
Yes, indeed. Well, you have, sir. I hope you're having a great Thanksgiving weekend, and you have yourself a wonderful afternoon and evening. Well, it's East Coast. It's already evening time, so it's time for you to go have dinner. You're gonna go have turkey.
I will. Second day of turkey. So, as we say in Nepal, namaste, Kevin.
Namaste to you, sir. Have a great day, and thank you so much. I'm gonna play this, and I'll be right back. Hey, and thanks for listening to this episode all the way to the end. Hey, pretty cool. Hey, don't forget to follow us so you can receive regular updates and new posts. And remember, take care of each other because each other's all we've got. See you next time on My Independence Report.